Notices of motion, and under Standing Order 2.5.1, notice of motion has been received from Councillor Kathy Casey and Councillor Whanana Efeso-Collins with respect to the issue that the SPCA have addressed us on. So can I invite you, Councillor Casey, to move your motion?
Thank you. It gives me great pleasure
under item 10.
To do that, Mr Mayor. And I seek your indulgence. Normally my speeches are quite short, so I save up all the minutes for a long one. And it could be more than 5 minutes today, so I seek your indulgence.
We'll indulge you with 10, Councillor, but if you can keep within that, thank you.
Over the last 24 hours, I've been asked by 3 different journalists if I've done the numbers and have I got the numbers to pass us. And to each of them I've said that I don't do numbers. I expect that every councillor comes to this meeting with an open mind to listen to the argument, and I think the strength of the debate and the strength of the evidence presented should unanimously give support to this notice of motion, and I truly believe that. So just to put that up front. Yesterday we signed off the Auckland Plan consultation document, and in there's a really good sentence which is dear to my heart, and it's that we will reduce harm. We will reduce harm to our citizens. And myself and Whanana Efeso-Collins are the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Community Development and Safety Committee. And that's why it's the two of us who've been presenting this over the last 24 hours. And just on that, the notice of motion system doesn't give you much time. I know there are local boards who would love to have been here, and I've had emails from them saying they didn't know about it. But that's the system that we've got. We submit a notice of motion, we don't hear until just a few days before the meeting that it's going to be accepted. Sometimes they're not, and sometimes they are. We've all had experience of that. So my apologies to any local board who has a strong view on this, who couldn't be present today. I did try to get as many of the agencies who have an interest to at least let them know that it was happening. So, why are we doing this? We have an advocacy role. And this is one of those times we're going to exert our influence on the government. Because the New Zealand public has tried to exert its will on the last government and failed miserably. And that was 32,000 people under select committee. And the government said no. Why should we have a ban on the sale and private use of fireworks? The figures speak for themselves. 516 people were injured in 2016. If we aim to minimise harm to people, to animals, to birds, to livestock, then we stop allowing irresponsible people to have them. And unfortunately that means that we put fireworks in the hands of professionals where they are safe. If it was your child or your animal that was one of those 516, you would be up here flying a flag with me. I don't think it should happen to another single human being that an errant firework causes distress, harm, injury, or even death of any animal or living thing. So yes, we've been through the hoops in Parliament before, but there is a new government, and we're a new council. We've even got a new councillor today, and I haven't asked Josephine what she thinks either. I haven't even asked the Mayor. I have no idea what people around this table think. So I'm appealing to you just to listen. That's why I wanted to do a couple of extra minutes. The current restrictions don't work. How do we know that? Because fireworks go off for a long time, over a long period. In fact, it's most of the year. The fireworks season, we call it. The season can be anything from a few days to a few weeks to a few months. During that time, our officers, our compliance officers, are under pressure due to complaints of noise and other complaints. Our animal management services are under pressure because dogs, as we heard this morning, get loose, get picked up, get impounded, get distressed. Our emergency services put their lives at risk because of errant fireworks. And I know that Sandra Coney would have been here today to talk about that. The firework that set the hill off, and the fire service had to put their lives at risk to put the fire out up at Piha. You've heard about that, it was in the media. Health services, ambulance services, fire services. Fires, injury, and just destruction of property and destruction of people and animals. So what I'm asking today of my colleagues is simply to ask the government to end this. It is the right thing to do. As a council, we've done as much as we can through the Public Safety and Nuisance Bylaw. We have already banned fireworks in public places. That's the extent of our jurisdiction. Anything more than that has to be a government, it has to be legislated for by the government. So we've exercised our authority, now we exercise our advocacy. And there is a groundswell of public opinion. Like the SPCA, I've been involved in this for many years. The time is now. People actually don't want it anymore. They don't want the noise, they don't want the distress, they don't want the injury to people. We have a mandate through the Auckland Plan to reduce harm. So it all comes together nicely to say that we should ask the government to step in and take over this issue. So I look forward to unanimous support from my colleagues today, and I did keep within my 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Congratulations. Well, 30 seconds outside, but we can overlook that. Councillor Collins, as the seconder, would you like to?
Not at this stage, thank you.
Not at this stage. Right. I'm going to open it up for any other councillors who would like to speak to the notice on the table. Everybody's familiar with what the notice of motion says, requesting the government to introduce legislation to ban the sales to the general public and to end their private use.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move an amendment.
Okay. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
My understanding is that it's not possible to make an amendment to a notice of motion, or any change for that matter. I stand corrected. If it were the case, it would certainly require the mover and the seconder. But I'll be guided by you.
My understanding is that it is possible to move an amendment under the standing orders to the notice of motion. It is, according to the advice I'm receiving now, treated the same as a normal motion. So the same rules apply under standing orders. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. If you could just put that up. Thank you. Thank you. I have heard what Dr. Sito at SPCA said, and it's absolutely appalling. I've heard what Councillor Casey has said, and I don't disagree at all with your concerns, not at all. I absolutely support the beginning, the substantive motion, but my addition to support this is that I feel we need to understand what Aucklanders think. We've had 32,000 people go to select committee from all of New Zealand, but our jurisdiction and our community is Auckland. And it was good to hear, though, that though unsubstantiated survey from West Auckland, 75%, but I'm not sure of how many. But we're not parochial. We're here to govern the whole region. And so, as we always do, I want to hear from what the people of the region say. And we need to have confidence of being backed by Aucklanders before we take this to government. It lends much more weight to the argument. So you've got the SPCA research, you've got different pieces of research and different surveys that have been done. So this just adds more grist to that mill. This exact issue was discussed on the 8th of February at our regulatory committee where it was suggested we canvass banning private sale of fireworks during the Public Safety and Nuisance Bylaw consultation, and the committee agreed to that. So we've got a process underway. We just add a simple question, which I've checked with our staff we can do. It's easy to do. There's no extra funding required. We put it to the people and we bring this back to us with the bylaw recommendations. And so I put it to people, of course, we all want to make sure that we've got the backing of our Aucklanders, and I think that's really important. Absolutely support this going to government. It's critical. But I do want to give our community a chance to have a say on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. The debate now is firstly on the amendment, so any speeches from this point are for or against the amendment. I should note the amendment has been seconded by Councillor Desley Simpson. Councillor Simpson, do you want to speak to it at this stage?
I'm happy to, Your Worship. I just support the amendment because the process has already been set in place by the committee that we have in Council looking after this particular issue, namely the Regulatory Committee. I think that we're already planning to go out about public safety. This is about public safety, and it's about nuisance, and it's about care for animals. It's all in that same bylaw. So I think the process is there, and I just think it gives us a greater mandate. We can sit here and have a personal view. We can hear what others have done, but at the end of the day, from my perspective, I'm here to make sure that the democracy element of what we do has got backing from the people of Auckland, and this gives a chance to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Filipaina.
Chairs, just a question in regards to, and on the amendment, is that the red part, which is currently the amendment we're debating, if that was put to the mover and the seconder for the original motion to be added to theirs, I'll be interested to see what comments would be from Councillor Casey and Councillor Collins, because for me, and just very briefly, I support the consultation process that's currently going through in August 18. But I just wanted to pose that particular question. Can both councillors of the original notice of motion be asked prior to the debate on the amendment, knowing that standing orders allows us to firstly debate the amendment? I'm just trying to find a compromise with this, Your Worship.
Okay. Well, it's open to the mover and the seconder of the original notice of motion to speak to it and indicate that the amendment. Sorry, if I just explain this point, the amendment does not negate, but actually supports the notice of motion, but adds something which says following public consultation that's already scheduled. So it's really, in order for it to be made part of the notice of motion, that would have to have the agreement of the mover and the seconder. So,
which is why I've asked.
Yeah,
That's
which is a valid
Yeah.
question, and it's up to
Yes.
Councillor Casey or Councillor Collins to speak on that if you want to take the call.
Yep, I'm very happy to. It looks like there's been some deals done already, and I didn't do the numbers, which means I would lose the amendment, and I don't want to do that, so I will accept the red
So
letters.
that-
If my seconder also accepts it.
I'll reluctantly accept it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so sorry, I'm just trying to clarify what happened just then. Were you in agreement to accepting the amendment?
Yes.
Okay, right, and now I have to take. I've got to check with the mood of the meeting that be accepted.
Just a point of order. I don't look, and please correct me around standing orders. It's for the red part to be included into the original motion of Councillor Casey and Councillor Collins, not to accept the amendment, as you've said, Your Worship, is to have the red part added to their one. Just clarification of point of order, please.
It's all right, we know who's doing the moving.
And it means their name is...
Okay,
their
just
name
before
is
Councillor Simpson goes.
Of course it is. So it's them.
Yeah. Okay, I've sought clarification of the standing orders, and if the original mover and seconder are ready to accept it, and the mover of the amendment and the seconder of the amendment are prepared to accept it, then it can be incorporated. That's what I'm advised standing orders require. So I'm presuming...
I'm happy to do that, and not reluctantly either, Mr. Chairman, because it's not about who does it, it's about public consultation.
And the seconder as well?
Yes, it was the public consultation bit that I
Okay,
wanted to include.
so at this point, I don't have to put the amendment because it's now incorporated. So we go back now to debating the notice of motion as amended, as incorporated.
May I ask a question?
Yep, sure.
So if the public came back and they said they don't want us to support the ban of the sale of fireworks by way of a request to the government, does it come back here?
The recommendation allows you still to go ahead and request the government, but obviously if the consultation shows that there's support for it, it makes the recommendation much more powerful on the government. If they say no, then it weakens the position, but it doesn't stop you. As it reads, the recommendation would still allow you, even given negative feedback, to go ahead and request the government to introduce the legislation. So that's still an option that's open, but obviously which way the consultation demonstrates public opinion is feeling around Auckland will either very much strengthen the resolution or diminish it. That's outside our hands. Let's see what the public say. According to the SPCA, the public may well actually endorse what's being asked, in which case we have a much stronger case to government. Councillor Watson, are you taking
I
a
want
call?
to speak to the motion. Yeah,
Oh, sorry. I'll add you to the list, but I've just note that I've got 3 other speakers just before you. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I actually put my turn in to speak before the recent activity, so I'm going to support the substantive as it now stands, the black and the red, because it makes sense. We need to always consult with our public on these sorts of issues. There are varying opinions from one extreme to the other. Some would term us the fun police. Others would say we are doing harm to humans, to children, and to animals with fireworks. So there's truth in both sides of those arguments. So let's hear what the public have to say, and let's make a judicial, thought-through decision through the appropriate committee, which is the Regs Committee, which then make a recommendation back here.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I think some really good collaboration and sense has prevailed. Very happy with where the recommendations are. I'm also very happy that we are talking to our community, because although, I've sat in the paddock with my horse on, on nights when fireworks have been going off. We spent most of our life living out west on a 5-acre bush block, and we always hoped for rain on Guy Fawkes Night. And now, Guy Fawkes Night is every night in West Auckland, it seems, and I'm sick of being woken up at 11, 12, 1 with fireworks. And I think most Aucklanders feel that way, most New Zealanders feel that way, as well as the emergency staff in hospitals who have to deal with the fallout. But I do agree with talking to our community, because I note with concern the local churches in out west, on just leading up to Guy Fawkes, they're selling fireworks to raise money. So, this is an educative process as well. And I know our wonderful Pacific Island Church on the main road in Te Atatu Peninsula was doing a roaring trade in fireworks. So, I don't think we should be, we can be a little bit one-dimensional and think everyone thinks like we do. I really acknowledge our need to go out and respectively talk to our community. If the government, sniffs the breeze and sees that there's an overwhelming desire by people through this consultation to ban fireworks, they may well respond before we even go through our complex and convoluted processes, and that's possibly a good thing as well. So very happy to support this very sensible recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Lee.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, members. I think this is a matter of process. I understand we are reviewing the public safety and nuisance bylaw, and while banning sale of fireworks is one of those things which is not part of our responsibility or within our ambit of responsibilities, going through a process with the public, I think, would give us the right to recommend to the government to take the desired form of action, but not before. Over the holidays, I had to intervene in a situation where a popular vineyard was going to feature a fireworks display, and at that time, if you remember, the Auckland and Waiheke in particular was tinder dry, and the fireworks display was to be set off in an area of regenerating tea tree. And all the permits mysteriously were given. However, with a bit of public pressure, good sense prevailed, and the fireworks display was cancelled, much to the relief of neighbouring landowners. Back in 2013, I chaired the Public Safety and Nuisance Bylaw, and as a part of that bylaw, which we dealt with fireworks within our ambit, and we banned the setting off of fireworks in a public place, except with the prior written approval of the council or a council-controlled organisation, and any other place in a way that does or is likely to create a nuisance or endanger any person, property, dog or other animal in a public place. So we exercised our responsibilities as far as we could then. I hear what other speakers are saying about that fine line between being responsible and proactive and taking a precautionary approach, and on one hand, and on the other hand, getting to the stage of being the fun police. I think we have to be cautious about that. There is another side to the story, and before making a decision on our preference, I think really we should be hearing from other people in the community. For instance, the people who make a living selling fireworks. Now, I'll give you an example. Wali's, the Chinese Emporium on Hobson Street. It's been there almost as long as we've had local government. Part of the old Chinatown of Auckland. It still is an amazing relic, if you like, not just of old Auckland, but of old China. You won't find a shop like that even in China, I would dare say. But Mr. Barry Wali often tells me when I go in there to buy soya sauce or something, not crackers, I don't buy them now, that his key part of his revenue every year is that sale of fireworks. And if that was cut out, he tells me, he would have to close that business. And now, how he survives up there without any car parks, and in the face of fierce competition from new generation Chinese supermarkets, I don't know. But he does, and he tells me he can sell 101 or 1,001 different items, an amazing array of items because of his annual fireworks sale. So I think in terms of good process, we represent the public and he's part of the public. We should hear from those sort of people before making a final decision. So yes, we have concerns, all of us have concerns about the damage firework can do, but we have to honour good process. We have to hear from all sides of our community before we come down on asking the government, because we can't do it, asking the government to take such a fairly drastic decision in terms of what's happened in New Zealand in the past. Now, the other aspect that has been raised is animal welfare. Banning the sale of fireworks is beyond our responsibility. So we're really telling the government to do something, but we do have responsibilities in terms of animal welfare, and I'm kind of disappointed not to hear from SPCA the real concerns people in the community have had this summer over widespread death of ducks and aquatic birds in our parks and what's been done about it, and apparently not a lot. So yes, we can tell the government what its business should be, but we, in terms of animal welfare, we should make sure our base is covered. And at this stage, in terms of the way we're looking after those, we're not doing such a great job ourselves, so I'll make that point as well. It comes back to process. I'm quite happy with the amended resolution. That's fair because it opens the door for people to have their say before we recommend the government to take some action. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor John Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would acknowledge what Councillor Lee was saying in terms of process. I would have thought that the original notice of motion would have required that correct process, because the New Zealand government, obviously, to introduce legislation would have to go through a consultative or submission process itself. In an issue such as this, I would have thought that was highly likely. And to be honest, this is an issue that clearly goes beyond just Auckland. It goes to all of New Zealand, of course. Why would Christchurch be any different than Auckland? So, yeah, I would have thought the original wording would have allowed for that process, but be that as may, there seems to be general agreement that this perhaps gives the pretext for an Auckland request at any rate. I noticed that when our Prime Minister was asked about this just as recently as the last Guy Fawkes, she was a little bit more ambivalent. She expressed concern about the number of pop-up fireworks venues that are visible all around Auckland, but she quite correctly, I think, also said, well, it would be very helpful to have information about the call-out rates, ACC claims, children who ended up in hospital and so forth and so on. Now, I know we had some statistics here today, which on the face of it were incredibly supportive of this notice of motion, but you know, to be honest, they perhaps could have been a little more rigorous or a little more open to question if someone's taken a contrary view, to be honest. But I think that the notion of the adults being seen as, you know, as the fun police, that's what Prime Minister Ardern brought up too. She said, you know, I could see kids perhaps being disappointed that you know, their fun being destroyed. So I think it's an important issue, and I thank Councillors Casey and Collins for bringing it up, because obviously there is a degree of public concern. It's a concern that hasn't been acted upon. The Prime Minister in the first instance didn't appear to show a willingness to take that up as of her own right. So it may well be that the notice of motion that's put forward here today might prompt such a response. So certainly on that basis, I think let's get everything out into the open. Let's see what's happening with fireworks. We certainly heard disturbing testimony today. It might be more, it might be less. And as Councillor Lee said, it's always useful to hear all the perspectives. So I'm more than happy to support the motion, either the original or the amended version as it turns out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newman.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I mean, I have to declare that my starting position around fireworks has always been that I'm actually quite supportive of a fairly permissive process around the sale and supply of fireworks. But I've largely changed my mind over the last year or so, given some of the incidents that I've observed with animal welfare in the south. So I do support a proper process around this, because if there is to be a change, it will have to be an evidence-based change. It appears to me that notwithstanding whatever regulatory framework that applies, frankly the sale of fireworks appears actually around Guy Fawkes night and the lead up to it to be quite unregulated. I mean, just tents pop up in the middle of car parks informally for 2 or 3 days prior, and then the period for letting off fireworks seems to stem not just that night, but it can go month after month after month. I would be keenly interested as part of a piece of policy work, and if the chair of the Regulatory and Bylaws Committee can reflect this back to staff, I would like to get some information, a breakdown about incidents in the individual animal shelters, because I know how busy the animal shelter is in Manukau. I know, well, anecdotally, I just think that in Manukau, when it comes to the fireworks, it appears to be the Wild West in terms of their application year-round all over the place. I would like to have an opportunity for us to hear from the New Zealand Fire Service. I think that is valuable. But it's one of those things, Your Worship, given it appears a general reluctance by Parliament to move on this issue over what seems to be forever, that it would have to be one of those issues that is informed by very strong public support, very strong sentiment. And if the process that we enter into as part of the review of the bylaw does its job, then the public feedback will be quite widely held. So I'll be interested to see how we can give effect to the need for the public to input into this as part of this amended notice of motion, understanding that it is coming back in August this year, but the community's input beyond those stakeholders like the New Zealand Fire Service will be essential. The other thing I'd say, Your Worship, is that there's a cultural element here, as been partially reflected on by Councillor Lee. Look, I've got the biggest Sikh temple in New Zealand, the Takanini Gurudwara. When they let off fireworks for Diwali, I mean, it literally wakes the dead. The whole of the south will rumble. It's a spectacular show, controlled by them, but actually there's plenty of occasions where fireworks are very, very significant beyond Guy Fawkes Night itself. So if there is to be a change around public displays on fireworks, it will have to be very carefully thought out in the context of a cultural understanding of fireworks beyond the traditional notion of Guy Fawkes itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Sir. I just thought I'd throw in a couple of comments and maybe outline my reluctance. I think there has been quite a bit of support for this, and I'll come to the issue of going to public scrutiny or public input in a minute. There's been a number of unscientific polls flying around the media, and they are very supportive, and whilst I never support most unscientific ones, this one stands in my favour, so I will today. But I'm interested in the idea of Parliament. It reminds me a little bit of what happened with Easter Sunday, and I don't think Parliament has been as proactive as we think it could have been, and which is why Councillor Casey and I reflected on this matter when we were at the Regulatory Committee and thought it was time to really advance the issue. And so I'm grateful that Councillor Casey was bold in suggesting it, and I'm happy, which is why I was more than happy to offer my support in seconding this motion. I'm interested in the notion of the fun police and what that notion means, and I've been reflecting on what that might mean. Last night I was asked by ZB if I was becoming part of the fun police, and I said, well, the counter to that, if there is a counter, whatever the definition of fun police is, well, that might not be the case for the 516 injury-related cases that went through our hospitals and GPs in 2016. That's not the case for why the SPCA made the public statement a couple of years ago saying that fireworks is traumatic for animals. And so I think we've got to weigh up carefully what our definition of fun police is and what our definition is of being responsible and caring for our communities, caring for people and caring for animals. So I'm happy to support this, which is what, and sorry, the reluctance bit in me was about me believing quite genuinely that the community has spoken. I've been getting all sorts of calls and emails and texts over the last little while of people who offered me feedback on this. And in my view, it hasn't changed since it was an issue that I first kind of talked about a couple of years ago when teaching at the university. So that's why I'm reluctant. But I'm happy for the process to go ahead, which is why I'm happy to accept this, and I'm looking forward to what Aucklanders say. But I think we've got to lead the way here, and by going out into public consultation, it means we are taking a lead step, and hopefully, depending on what the result comes back, it either says, yeah, let's fly with this, and we've got strength going to the government, or maybe a chance for us to reassess. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I want to just ask potentially yourself or the Chair of the Regulatory Committee, just because I'm not on that committee, some just details around public use. In my ward, I have a relatively large school that has a major fireworks display at the school. Would that be public use? I mean, and if that's the case, you know, we're stopping a very successful community event and I wouldn't want to vote in support of that. I want to make that very clear. So I just want to know exactly as if it's just, is it domestic use? I mean, define public use, please, somebody.
I presume, but maybe I'll ask Councillor Cooper from the perspective of the Regulatory Committee, that public use would be a public organisation sanctioned by relevant authorities to hold a display.
Right.
So I'm not sure what the rule is at the moment when you have these big spectacular displays that we had, for example, at Chinese New Year, $30,000 worth of fireworks going up in 10 minutes. But I presume that when you're handling explosives of that nature, there is some licensing system. But maybe Linda or Kathy, can you tell us? Yeah, that might be something that we look for in the process of working this forward.
So just before she answers, a supplementary, just so you understand my context. So I think that if we go out, and we have to be very clear in the material that we go out around this bylaw of the practical, questions that people will ask. And, what I believe, and correct me, Councillor Casey or Councillor Collins, if I'm wrong, but what I believe is the intent round here is that it's basically misuse of fireworks. Misuse, in other words, throwing them in letterboxes, upsetting animals. But is that correct? Or is it this is actually, you don't want fireworks of any kind at all? Because for me, there was the balance. I mean, when I agreed to second Councillor Cooper's amendment, it was actually to ensure that we knew. I mean, we all think we know, but we don't. It was to ensure that the decision actually has public mandate. We all think think it does, but the details around that. I don't have coverage of, and I suppose my only concern on this motion now, listening to the discussion, is that we have to define public.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The first point is, and the SPCA made it, they don't object to a public display. They worry about a private display. And it might be malicious, as they suggested, but it might be simply, if I have fireworks in my backyard and there's a house on either side of me, the dogs on either side are just going to go crazy because it's happening right where they are. How would you define public? I think if we're advocating to Parliament, so we're not defining the term. I think Parliament will be defining the term, and what I imagine Parliament will do is say it needs to be by a public organisation authorised to hold such a display, and part of that authorisation would be a knowledge of how safely to detonate the explosives and maybe some sort of regulatory requirement about it. I don't think we can define it here because by definition we're advocating something to Parliament, and Parliament will determine how that is done. But common sense says an organisation that is a public organisation, it might be a school, it might be a gurdwara, it might be a cultural association, but there'd be some standard that they would have to meet before they can put these explosives into the air. And judging from the ones that I've seen, or Sky Tower for that matter, they are done by professionals, because what they're dealing with is a whole lot more than the minor fireworks that we might set off in our backyard. So that's my best guess to answer your question. But again, invite Councillor Cooper or Casey, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Just to say that in the notice of motion, we are not the fun police. We think that it's an appropriate role for local government to hold events, to celebrate whatever it is we want to celebrate, whether it's a local issue, a national issue, even an international issue. So it was just to bring an element of control to the use of fireworks. So I agree with the Mayor. It's not for us to say how the government would implement that, but certainly take it out the backyards and put it in a safe place. That's really what this is about.
I think
don't
that's the
stop the fun, the community fun.
Okay, great. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to speak in support of this. We have Matariki, Te Ara Rama Matariki Light Trail in Glen Innes, where everybody comes from all parts of our community to, see the fireworks and take part, and it really develops a good sense of community there. I think anything that frees up the emergency services, because the pressure is so much on them is a good thing. And, you know, I think I've just seen too much, because every time we have Guy Fawkes, we have fires on our maunga, on Maunga. You know, there's people out there lighting the fireworks aimed at cars, and I'm not sure if it's because we're a patrol car or what, but the distress to animals, and yeah, but I do agree with going to the public as well. And I don't really want to encourage us to follow Australia, but Australia, you know, they do quite well with their banning of private sales of fireworks, and my family always goes to the public fireworks displays they hold. So, you know, if they can do it, why not? But anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. A lot of it's actually been said. I do want to support this motion, but I can remember living in Sydney when the ban of fireworks actually happened, and after that there were a lot better public displays. I think we can look at probably 5 or 6 public displays in Auckland that we can get behind, and they can have a licence for it. And for the wards, there could be, each of the wards could perhaps decide, maybe through the local board, they could decide which public displays they would like to promote, but displays such as Diwali and New Year, Guy Fawkes, etc. I think whoever's going to put on a public display have to come to the council, get a licence to do it, and I think most people would be really happy with that. And when you look at some of the displays around the world, I think some of the ones that we have, I think if we have more of a public display, companies will probably promote and sponsor them a lot better. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wasn't going to speak, so I do, however, have a question based on what I've heard around this table. The question is, Councillor Cooper, if I could ask the question to her through you, Your Worship.
Sure.
Councillor question.
Councillor question. Can you Cooper this up?
I have a Cooper. Yeah. Councillor question, I have a Cooper. Councillor Cooper, look, my question is, and you mentioned it when you put up the amendment, was that you've checked with staff around a question that would go out to our community that they are happy with. I'll be interested to find out what is the question, because I'm hearing quite a bit of a debate and concerns that have been raised, albeit supportive. So what is the question? Because I think that'll be actually quite... that'll be quite interesting to find out, because it may slant or may not. So, yeah, I'll just be interested, please, to see what question may well be going out for consultation.
Through you back to Councillor Filipaina, Mr Chair, and the rest of my colleagues here. Of course, we need to create that question so that we aren't slanting, that we're looking at this, because as was said before, we have no jurisdiction over fireworks that isn't on public property. We have no jurisdiction. So the only way you can stop what's happening to animals and people is to cut it off at the source. So that's kind of what this is aimed at, I guess. And so for me, it is going to be around fashioning that question. And I'd like to work with Councillor Casey so we make sure that we get that question for public consultation, because we know sort of or it'll be a bit like a quasi-referendum really, that we want to make sure we've got the question open, and it could be, I don't know, I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. We want to work with our staff, something like, you know, that ban it, but limited to, say, ticketed public events using a licensed operator or something like that, I don't know. But I think we do know that, I mean, I have people in Piha saying, they complain and they go, well, there's somebody who's got their property and they're selling tickets on their property to have it. You know, come along and they've got this, it's right near the bush, it's just really dangerous and all that sorts of things. So we've got to make sure we asked a good open-ended question that's clear about what the answer we're trying to get, and allows everybody's views to come through.
So the clarification, Your Worship, was, I thought you had said there was a question that was put.
No, I said we can. It's quite possible, and I've spoken to our policy staff and we raised that at our regulatory meeting, and I asked it again yesterday because I wanted to make sure we could do this, use a vehicle we already had, and they said yes, we can put that in. We can put anything we like in our...
Can I then request that at least the question be forwarded through to the councillors, because I'll be interested.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
I will make sure, because I don't think it should be up to me or staff to decide what the question is.
Cool bananas.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, you've got the next call. Do you want
Yeah,
to...
so I think that's what I was going to say. I mean, the draft of the bylaw will come back to the regulatory committee anyway, and Councillor Casey always comes to that, but we can memo it out to everybody.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's great.
And it actually has to come back to council before it's sent out to the public anyway.
Can I just want to take a brief call, because I think the debate's been pretty thorough, and then Councillor Casey, you've got a right of reply. First of all, just to thank councillors for what I think has been a really measured debate, and I want to thank in particular Councillors Casey and Cooper, because I think between you, you've come up with a really good place for the council to position itself. I spent last night after the cricket, there wasn't much fireworks at the cricket, so I thought I'd better focus on this issue. Reading the Parliamentary Select Committee report from 2015, and actually it was a bipartisan report, evenly balanced committee. And yeah, Parliament hasn't been and probably won't be proactive, and I guess you know, a change of government won't necessarily change that. If anything, it might make the new government more cautious, because it's more likely to be accused of being nanny state. But I'm glad, you know, we don't get into that debate. We should look at this matter, as I think Councillor Newman said, on an evidence-based approach, and we should look at, first of all, weighing up the harm done versus the pleasure received, because that's essentially what the balance is. Is there pleasure? Kids love their fireworks in their backyard, but the harm done is equally, well, I won't say equally persuasive. I think perhaps it's more persuasive. I've got a dog that just goes frantic on Guy Fawkes night. It's a farm dog, and I put it inside, complete with smell and dead rat and rabbits and God knows what, because she just reacts as we see so many other animals in the presentation by the SPCA are reacting. I think we have to look at the fire risks. I think we need the statistics on the injuries. I know that has been reduced by the amendments that were made, but it hasn't been eliminated. But the most important thing, I think, if we are to have a game changer in this, is to go out and do the work that needs to be done on finding out what our constituents think.
Absolutely.
And I want to suggest to colleagues and to the regulatory committee that we not only do a seek submissions and go to specific groups, like we would want something from the fire service and obviously the SPCA, etc., but that we actually do a quant survey, because I've looked at the surveys that are quoted in the Select Committee report, and they're all over the place. One says 39% want a ban, another says 69% does. I think doing a proper survey with a simple question, and that question might be the same one we go out with from the Regulatory Committee, we can work out with a professional polling agency. It won't be biased, it will be objective, but it will give us a sense of our public. And I suspect that there is a majority of people now that want us to change. And if we can demonstrate that, that stops our central government politicians being quite as cautious and nervous about the issue as they probably are. And if we do that in a non-partisan way, I think that's the way it should be done. I don't see any party politics in this at all, to be frank. So I'm very happy to support the motion. With public displays, I just want to say something about that. It used to just be Guy Fawkes. Now it's New Year, Chinese New Year, Diwali, Matariki, and probably a range of other events. The public displays are really impressive, but they need to be professionally done and supervised to ensure that there's a minimum of risk. I just want to sound a note of caution. I've seen it out in the public debate that maybe council should put on all these displays. I don't think so. I think we should seek private sector sponsors. WTV did the last one at Vodafone. And it was $3,000 a minute, but the crowd really lapped it up. So I think we should be looking to work with private sector groups to sponsor displays in various parts of the city on appropriate occasions, rather than adding this to the long list of things that people might like us to spend on when we don't have the money to spend. So congratulations to councillors for their input. I think the resolution is right. I think that it will carry a whole lot more weight when it's backed by objective research on public opinion and where public opinion has evolved to, and then we may get the response that we're looking for from central government. Councillor Casey, in reply.
Well, just to say thank you, I hope for a unanimous vote of support for this, but I agree with the Mayor. I think the public has a mood for change, and I think we're going to find that out at the end of this year, and it will make the case to Parliament much stronger. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for the brevity of the reply. So there's been no request for a roll call vote, so I'll simply put it on voices. Those in favour of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those to the contrary, say no. Aye. So there is. We won't say that it's unanimous, but
it was unanimous.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to see Kathy's face.
Oh, were you?
Yeah, I just wanted to see Kathy's face when I said
Mr. Mayor, show of hands.
We'll reprimand Councillor Filipaina.
unanimous.
I declare that passed unanimously. Now.